So, hello everybody. Can I first say what an absolute privilege it is to be here today? Thank you so much to the HRB for inviting me as an early career scientist to talk about our projects. I'm going to talk to you today about what myself, my colleagues, our collaborators believe is a new era for genomics in Ireland, specifically focusing on data infrastructures and career progression for people like me and what's to come. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to take you on a brief recent history of large genetic initiatives in Europe. Back in 2018, the 1+ Million Genomes Initiative was launched. This is effectively a declaration of cooperation where European countries came together and said, we want to provide access to 1 million genome sequences across Europe to improve healthcare, policy making, and research. At this point in time, Ireland was an observer country. Then I take you to 2020 and 2023. Of course, we had the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which only showed how greater access to genomic data could power our responsiveness. But also, the Beyond 1 Million Genomes project began. And if the 1+ Million Genomes Initiative was the declaration of what we wanted to do, the Beyond 1 Million Genomes project was how we were going to do it. And it set out a description of action, or a plan, about how we would achieve access to those genomes across Europe, looking at things like ethical, legal, social issues, quality and standards, and of course, technical infrastructure. How would we actually make it happen? Again, at this point, Ireland is an observer at an observer status. Then I take you to 2022, when the Genomic Data Infrastructure Project was launched across Europe. At this point, Ireland also joined the initiative, and coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, our national strategy for genetics and genomics was also launched at the same time. This is when Ireland officially joined, and I think there's great things to say for the HRB for pushing that as well. So what the European Genomic Data Infrastructure is doing is it's establishing federated databases across Europe for sustainable and secure access to genomic data. A federated database, which Mark talked about earlier as well, is essentially establishing an infrastructure where the data remains within the member state but can be accessed by researchers across Europe and analysed in concert. The Genomic Data Infrastructure Ireland project is the Irish arm of that initiative, so we're essentially making a proof of concept infrastructure or database here in Ireland to link up to that wider European initiative. And they provide us with a software stack that's exactly what other European countries are deploying to ensure interoperability. I'm really excited to talk about the Genome of Ireland project. So this was just announced a couple of weeks ago, again, with funding from the HRB and Europe. So we're going to sequence 1,200 genomes of healthy individuals living on the island of Ireland. It's going to be a starting point for clinical genetics and allele frequencies, looking at people who are carrying variants, for example, a control for genetics and genomic studies, and also a genetic reference for Irish population structure, linked up to wider efforts in other European countries doing the same thing to make a reference genome for Europe. So we're not really, reinventing the wheel here. Genomic data infrastructure has long been advocated for, particularly in the patient advocacy space. We can look at IPOSI's Citizen Jury on Genomics calling for a national database. The Irish Health Research Forum, Avril, is here as well, on advocating for infrastructural genomics. The National Genetics and Genomics Strategy itself talks about establishing a national genetic and genomic database. So, moving on, instead of going into the technicalities of genomics and the software and all that, I think instead I'm going to tell a story from the perspective of Sarah, John, and their son, Cillian. This is fictitious, but it definitely represents what's going on today and what our patients are facing today. At just a few months old, Sarah and John notice that Cillian doesn't seem to be meeting his milestones as he should. Something to them as parents doesn't feel right. They go to see a specialist, which is a journey in and of itself, and they suggest that Cillian may have a genetic condition, and they suggest genetic testing. Sarah and John provide their informed consent for this clinical genetic testing on behalf of Cillian, but unfortunately, his test comes back negative, and Cillian doesn't have a genetic diagnosis. Our reality right now, despite some obvious notable exceptions, and we saw again from Mark earlier some really wonderful projects and research projects looking at genomic diagnoses, but right now Cillian's genetics results come back in a PDF file. His data is never available for secondary use. It lives in isolation, and we never use it again, despite spending thousands of euros on each genetic test, thousands of which are done every year. The vast majority of clinical data is located within other countries or with commercial providers, never used again, and sometimes research genomic data too stays within the institution where the research program was being carried out. we don't have a shared infrastructure for genetic and genomic data. But what instead if we could make this a reality? And this is what we're working towards. What if at the point of testing, Sarah and John gave their informed consent for Killian's data to be used for research? What if his data entered an infrastructure? This may be one or two infrastructures, clinical and research might be in different ones, they might be in the same, but what if they entered an infrastructure? What if then, through various initiatives that are ongoing, like our national strategy, like the upcoming European Health Data Space legislation, like the 1+Million Genomes Initiative, what if we established a secure processing environment to bring that data back home, our data diaspora, in effect? And what then if Killian's data was available for access and a large European research initiative brought it into a large study with other unsolved patients? The examples I'm going to call out here are, for example, RD-CAT, I don't know if Professor Crowley's in the audience, or AirDARA, and there's almost 400 million euro behind AirDARA for solving unsolved genetic disease and rare disease. So let's say the researchers use a new method of analysing Killian's and the other patient's DNA. And they find something, a new gene, and that's not made up. This is happening. Just last year, through Genomics England, a large genomic data infrastructure, 44 new patients were diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental condition because they found a new gene, because they put these large data sets together. Families like this family I'm talking about got a diagnosis for their child. What if then the result went back to the infrastructure, went back to the clinic, and got clinically confirmed? Killian would have a diagnosis. His treating team would know how to handle his care better. It might be implemented, for example, into our new modernised care pathways. And even better, if we think even further around the corner, what if a new treatment that targets that gene is developed and a clinical trial starts recruiting? We now know that Killian has the disease, he has the genetic diagnosis, he can enroll in the trial, and he has a chance to receive treatment. We're also massively investing in the commercialization of research, and for example as well, in the National Clinical Trials Office. It's all connected. These are not separate projects happening in isolation. We can all put them together. This is a possibility. The work that we're doing as part of the 1+Million Genomes Initiative and the Genomic Data Infrastructure Project aims to create a proof of concept national infrastructure to show how we can do this, and we're working on it right now. The next thing I was asked to talk about, which I find a little bit difficult, is about myself. So you can see that this work involves a lot of collaboration. I'm an early career scientist, and I was asked to say, well, Laura, what do you do in all of this? You know, it doesn't really seem like your traditional postdoc. And I see my role as joining the dots. I work across all of these different organizations, and you'll see I haven't used any organizational logos or anything so far because it's not about that. It's about creating a national resource. It's not about one university getting to host this or a hospital getting to host this. It's about doing it together. So my job is to link us to Europe too. We run workshops, we run stakeholder groups, and we get the opinions of Irish clinical geneticists, patients, the public, scientists, and it's my job to link that up to Europe. And it's really nice to say that a lot of that work is actually informing what's going on with the minimal viable product for this infrastructure. So I'm the person that links all these together. And you can imagine that that's not your traditional postdoc, okay? I'm not focused on publishing a load of papers, I'm not looking for citations, and that's not really what patients care about either. The pros are that I get exposed to patients, the public, policymakers, scientists, funding agencies, here I am. And I've made fantastic connections to Europe and met a load of wonderful people and got a lot of knowledge that I can bring back to Ireland. And the main thing, actually, I think, is I get to do something I care about, because this is a tough space to work in as a postdoc if you don't really care about it. Cons is what happens next. And can I just take a moment to thank the two people who raised the question about career progression earlier, because it's actually great to think that other people, this is in other people's heads too, I'm not just having an existential crisis, and other people are actually thinking about it as well. So what's next for people like me in roles like mine, who are the connectors, the people who join the dots, the people who drive these projects and ensure their long-term sustainability? Unless I pursue an academic career path, will I get to keep working on this? And wouldn't it be really sad if I didn't? So where's up? So if you take anything from my talk today, it's these 3 points. I think we all need to focus on the strategic coordination of investment that we're putting into healthcare, therapeutic development, these data infrastructures, data spaces, and clinical trials to establish a national infrastructure for genetics and genomics. Again, like Mark said, I keep quoting Mark, we want to be leaders, not laggers. And also Esther said earlier as well, this kind of collaborative investment, bringing it all together. So the HRB as well, together with Europe, are investing in this proof of concept infrastructure. So we're going to try and show everyone how we can do this. And then lastly, to establish secure and viable career paths in academia or the public sector for genomic and other data scientists to ensure the long-term sustainability and return on investment in these projects. A lot of money has been invested in my education and me becoming a genomic data expert. And it'd be a real shame if I didn't get to keep working on genomics. I'd like to say, they say raising a baby takes a village, so does making a genomic data infrastructure. So here's my village. So special shout out to everyone working on this. I'm sure I don't have them all here, and if you're in the room and I don't have you here, I'm sorry, and you're great, and thank you. And if you're not here and you'd like to work with us, let me know. But otherwise, thank you so much.